Alright everybody, so welcome to the first of probably a few videos regarding firearms. Now, as with every video involving a gun, all guns will be unloaded, and I will not be using any live ammunition unless I'm showing footage of when I'm at the range. So this gun does not have any ammunition in it, and any ammunition that is shown on the screen in these videos is going to be something called a snap cap, which is an inert round. It does not have any black powder in it, does not have any firing capability. It is just something to protect the gun from dry firing, which is basically shooting it without any ammunition in it, which you can do with just about any modern gun, but it's not good for it long term. So anything you see me using here, like these red cartridges and everything, these are not real bullets. So I just want to make that clear. These are not real bullets, not real ammunition. And I have a magazine with some of those in it. It is not real ammunition. So anyway, the reason I wanted to make this video and sort of start this off with, I wanted to sort of talk about how I got into guns and also how guns work, because that was something I really had no idea about for quite a while. And we see a lot of guns in movies and TV shows and that sort of thing, and I've just always been fascinated about how everything works. So what I'm going to do here is talk about some of the basics of how a gun works, from a layman's standpoint. I'm not going to go into the technical details of all the stuff that happens that you don't see underneath all the metal, but what a layman would need to understand, a layperson would need to understand about how guns work. And then I'm going to talk about the 4 basic rules of gun safety and how there's a few sort of, I guess we can call them myths that I can kind of bust, because guns are safe when they are handled appropriately, and when you sort of take some time to understand them a little bit more than just knowing them as being these killing machines or whatever. They are relatively safe. And I say relatively because it's a piece of machinery and designed by an imperfect person, so there's always failures with anything, whether it's a gun, a camera, a car, whatever. There's always the possibility of a failure, but there's a lot of safety procedures in place and a lot of safety rules that many gun owners and gun users abide by that really minimize a lot of those risks. So really quick, how I got into guns. I grew up in New Jersey, so not a gun-friendly state by any means, but I'd always seen guns in the movies, and I played my share of Duck Hunt and the other games with the guns on Nintendo and everything, and I'd enjoyed it, and I've kind of always wanted to try shooting one for real, but never had the opportunity to, and I never really pursued it because I grew up in a sort of gun-unfriendly household, and it was fine. I just sort of didn't really think much of it growing up. But then I moved down here to Texas, which was the complete antithesis of New Jersey in terms of guns. So after living here for a few months, I said, okay, I'm finally going to try out the gun thing. I'm going to go to a range and I'm going to check it out and see how it works and go from there. So I tried it, and turns out it was I was hooked right from the beginning. So and that's when I first learned the 4 sort of mandatory rules of gun safety. So number 1 is always assume a gun is loaded. Now, the rules I'm going to give you are the sort of the general rules that everybody follows, but I also have like my sort of part B to some of them, which I got from another gun YouTuber on YouTube here. But always assume that a gun is loaded unless you have personally checked to make sure it is unloaded. So starting with this one, we're going to always assume, if a gun is just sitting there, we're going to assume it's loaded unless we check it. So we're going to pull the slide back. We're going to see that inside the barrel, and hopefully you can see that on the video there's nothing in the barrel. And with the way semi-automatic weapons work, which I'll talk about in a minute, when you do this, that mechanism will eject whatever round is inside the chamber as long as there's no malfunctions or things aren't working. So this is a way to make sure that there's nothing in there. Also, we can check the bottom to ensure that there's no magazine inserted. So we know by looking at these two things that this gun is not loaded. So no matter what, I can sit here and pull the trigger until the cows come home and nothing will happen. So that's number one. So always assume that a gun is loaded unless you've checked it to make sure that is not the case. Number two, always point the muzzle in a safe direction. Meaning don't point the muzzle at anything you're not willing to destroy. So even as we're sitting here talking, the gun's pointing away from me. I'm sitting back here, the gun's pointing that way. So always point the muzzle in a safe direction. And that's just kind of common sense. And a lot of folks that have never been around guns before, when they go to the range for the first time, they'll be shooting and, bang, 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 whatever. And then someone will have a question. They'll say, oh, how do I do this? And they point their gun at somebody else while they're asking the question. And that's just sort of a no-no. So you always want to make sure the muzzle is pointed in a safe direction. Number three is always know what is behind your target. So right now, you can't really see it, it's off screen, but my gun is pointed at my TV. So I don't want to destroy my TV, but whenever you are, if you're planning on shooting someone or something, make sure that you know what is behind the target, because there's a very good chance that the bullet may go through whatever you are pointing at. So always know what is behind your target as well, to make sure that you don't destroy or harm something that you don't want to do so. And the most important one, I think, which is the most common sense one, is if you're holding a gun, don't put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to shoot. And I see this in movies all the time. People will be running around with guns and they're like, and their finger's right here on the trigger. That's just a bad idea, because you never know. If you trip over something, like, oh, I just pulled the trigger. So you'll see a lot of times, especially on gun YouTube videos like this one, people holding guns will have their pointer finger kind of up here. There's no reason to have it on the trigger because I'm not shooting anything, at least for the moment. So always keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. So those are the basic gun safety rules. And of course there's modifications to them, and there's sort of, your own sort of interpretations of them, like I said, but those are the basic rules. So treat all guns like they're loaded. Always point the gun in a safe direction. Always know what is behind your target, and don't put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to fire. I don't know necessarily that there's an order to those per se, but those are the basic rules. So how does a gun work? So what we're going to talk about here is semi-automatic guns, which is I don't want to say a majority, because the revolvers are pretty popular too, but and revolvers are much simpler, so that's why I'm not going to be talking about those yet. I'll do another video about revolvers later on. But how a gun works. So you have a couple of major parts or significant parts to your gun. So this right here is called the slide. So this is what actually slides back and forth. And for those interested, this is a Beretta 92 FS. It's my favorite gun. I put new grips on here, but it's pretty much a stock Beretta 92 FS. And yeah, so this is the slide, and pretty much any semi-automatic weapon is going to have this piece of equipment here. And this is what slides back when you shoot the gun and sort of cycles the action and such. The slide also contains the barrel, which is where the projectile goes and the bullet goes, and that's where the bullet comes out of in the front. Then you have your magazine well, or your magazine receptacle. I don't know if there's a technical term for it, but it's where you put your magazine with your bullets in it. And most gun people will tell you that this is not a clip, it's a magazine. So if I say clip accidentally, I'll probably correct myself, but this is a magazine. So the magazine contains your ammunition, and again, these are not real bullets. So, and this is not real ammunition, I mean. And if you want to get technical, a bullet is only the top part of a cartridge. A bullet is not necessarily this whole thing. This whole thing is a cartridge. But again, who cares? So your magazine will go into the bottom of your gun like so, and then you want to give it a good push. And as you can see through the ejection hole here, we can now see the top round in our magazine right down here. So again, if I take this out, look what happens. It goes away. Now you see it, now you don't. So in order to make the gun ready or put it into what's called battery, which is ready to fire, we need to chamber this round. So let's see if I can angle this in such a way. You can see it's a little bit below the barrel. So to chamber this, we're going to pull our slide back and then let go. And that process takes the round out of the magazine and puts it into the chamber. So the round is essentially sitting right about here. See, I'm kind of looking at, there we go. So the round is sitting, oops, right about there, inside the chamber, waiting to be fired. Now, all we have to do now is pull the trigger, and then if this were a live round, the firing pin, which is in here behind a safety, as soon as I pull the trigger, a little blocker will come up to allow the firing pin to strike the round, and then as soon as I do that, that ignites the primer on the back of the cartridge and starts the reaction, which causes the bullet to then leave the gun and go down range. Now at the same time, when I pull the trigger, the gun's going to go off, so it's going to be a recoil, and I'll talk about recoil later on. So the gun's going to go off and go up. Now as a result of that, the slide is going to automatically come back, and I want you to watch what happens. So if you didn't see what happened, it really quickly ejected that round, which if this were live ammunition, it would be a spent casing. There would be no bullet at the end. And then it's going to automatically chamber the next round. So now I can do that very same thing again. I can aim, make sure I'm aiming in a safe place, like at a gun range, for example, aiming down range at my target, pull my trigger, and then automatically, when I do that, the gun will go off. There'll be recoil, and as it recoils, the slide will come back. It ejects the round and then loads the next one. And then I can do that one more time. So that's why it's a semi-automatic weapon. It's not fully automatic, meaning pulling the trigger only gives me one shot or one round goes off. If it were fully automatic, this would continuously go back and forth and it would continuously shoot rounds. That's how machine guns work, essentially. But once I pull the trigger on this one and it ejects the round, now look what happened. The slide locked back. So what that is basically telling me is, hey, there's no more rounds in the magazine and the gun is now empty. So just like before, I take my magazine out by pushing this button on the side. It's called a magazine release. I push that, and pretty much just about every gun, when you push that, gravity will pull the magazine out. So that's why a lot of times when if you're seeing in the movies or something, they'll be shooting and then they just hit that button and let the magazine kind of drop to the ground. It's because gravity helps with that. So now the magazine is out, the slide is locked back, we know our gun is empty, and now we can put in more ammunition and continue shooting if that's what we're intending to do, or put the gun down and do something else. So that is the basic gist of how a semi-automatic firearm functions. You know, I hope this shows you a little bit of how guns work and how they're very safe. And let's actually talk about safety for a second. So guns are going to have a lot of safety features built in because obviously what gun manufacturer wants to release a firearm that is not safe. So this particular firearm, and again, if I miss one or two features that are here, please feel free to put a comment in there because I am by no means claiming to be an expert. So this has a trigger safety so that if this gun were loaded and if it were dropped, for example, the gun cannot go off. Because in order for a gun to go off, the firing pin has to strike the back center of the round, which will ignite what's called the primer, and that's usually the little kind of shiny piece in the middle there. So if this were a live round, that would be a primer. So when it strikes the primer, that actually ignites the powder inside and fires the bullet. So so in order for me to fire a round from this gun, I'm going to see if we can see this on the camera. So if you look right here, I'm going to try to get this in there. So you see, I'm going to pull the trigger kind of a few times. You see this little thing that comes up right where I'm pointing. That is actually blocking the firing pin from hitting the primer until the trigger's pulled. So when the trigger's off, that goes down, and that actually blocks the firing pin entirely. So that means if there were a live round in this chamber and I were to drop this gun onto a hard surface or something, it will not go off. Which is, I know a lot of people are worried about guns just going off, but it doesn't happen. Also, this gun happens to have a safety. So for example, right now, if I pull the trigger, it's going to fire as many times as I do that, or as much ammo as I have. But if I activate the safety right here, which is this switch, once I do that, the trigger is disconnected from the mechanism. So I can do this all day and nothing will happen. Now again, it's a mechanical piece. It can fail. It's very unlikely that it would fail, so we still want to obey those 4 main rules of gun safety, but this is an extra added measure to prevent the gun from accidentally going off. So guns are very safe as long as you handle them and respect them appropriately. So again, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you watching. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments, and I'd be happy to do my best to answer them. And I'll have some more, gun videos coming up in the future here. Again, this is my Beretta 92 FS, and if you are looking for a good first gun, this is a very accurate gun. It's very easy to shoot. It's also very consistent, very reliable. So I absolutely love this gun. So, this is a great gun to have. So if you're not sure which one to start with, this one was also, not this actual gun, but this model was used in a bunch of movies. So the Lethal Weapon movies, it's what Mel Gibson carried around. In the Die Hard movies, this is what Bruce Willis carried around. So this was used by the military, actually. The military version was called the M9, but essentially the same gun with a couple of minor differences, but 99% the same gun. This was used by the U.S. Army for many years. So it has a terrific track record of being a great pistol. So love the Beretta 92 FS. So anyway, have a wonderful day. Stay safe. Enjoy yourselves. And talk to you soon.